Imagine that you run a large industrial corporation. Not a digital service and not a consulting firm, but real production. Steel, chemicals, mechanical engineering. The kind of business that requires huge capacity, continuous operation, and cheap energy. You are in Germany, a country that for decades was considered a model of industrial rationality, engineering discipline, and economic pragmatism. Here, people always knew how to calculate costs, plan years ahead, and avoid sudden moves. And now, it is the year 2023. You arrive at your plant and see idle production lines. The factory is standing still. Not because of a lack of orders, not because of staff shortages, and not because of logistics problems. The plant is shut down because turning on the equipment has become economically unviable. Electricity costs so much that producing goods means operating at a loss. This is not an isolated case and not a temporary disruption. It is the direct result of the so-called energy transition, the Energiewende, which was supposed to make Germany the flagship of the green economy. The idea looked attractive. Abandon dirty energy sources, rely on wind and solar power, demonstrate environmental responsibility and moral leadership. Over the past 2 decades, Germany has poured more than $500 billion into this project. It is one of the largest energy programs in history. The outcome turned out to be the opposite of what was expected. The country ended up with some of the highest electricity prices among developed economies. Industry began cutting production and moving investments outside Europe. In some regions, the situation reached the point of absurdity. Wind turbines are being dismantled to make room for the expansion of coal mines. This is not about external pressure and not about force majeure. It is an example of how the state, through its own decisions, created a systemic crisis. To understand how Germany arrived at this point, we need to go back to the early 2010s. At that time, the country's energy system looked fairly balanced. The generation mix included coal, nuclear power, and renewables. Nuclear power plants provided roughly a quarter of total electricity output. They delivered stable, predictable, and relatively cheap power that did not depend on weather conditions. The original plan envisioned a gradual transition. Nuclear energy was seen as a base element that would allow renewables to develop calmly, without putting system stability at risk. This approach was logical and technically sound. The turning point came in March 2011, after the accident at the Fukushima nuclear power plant in Japan. The disaster shocked global public opinion, even though it occurred in a seismically active region and was caused by a unique combination of natural factors. From an engineering perspective, the situation called for analysis and conclusions, not immediate radical decisions. But in Germany, the reaction was political. Public fear quickly turned into pressure on the authorities. Anti-nuclear movements, which had long existed in the country, received a powerful boost. Under these conditions, the government decided to completely abandon nuclear energy. Moreover, some reactors were shut down almost immediately, without a full replacement in place. In effect, Germany voluntarily gave up a significant share of its base generation. This decision became the key mistake of the entire energy strategy. Instead of using nuclear power as a support during the transition period, the country destroyed functioning infrastructure into which enormous resources had already been invested. As a result, renewable energy began to be built not as a supplement, but as a forced replacement. This fundamentally changed the economics of the process. New capacity did not increase the overall potential of the system. It merely compensated for sources that had been shut down earlier. In the years that followed, massive construction of wind and solar facilities was financed through subsidies and surcharges on electricity bills. These costs were passed on to consumers and businesses. Electricity prices in Germany rose to levels that significantly exceed those in the United States and many other industrial countries. At the same time, the expected environmental effect did not materialize. Despite hundreds of billions in investment, carbon dioxide emissions remained roughly at the same level for a long time. The reason is simple. Renewable sources do not provide stable generation. During periods without wind or sunlight, the system had to be supported by coal and gas-fired power plants. Nuclear plants, which could have fulfilled this role without emissions, had already been shut down and could not be brought back online quickly. This is how Germany ended up in a situation where it simultaneously lost cheap energy, undermined its industrial competitiveness, and failed to achieve its declared climate goals. This is the result of the most expensive energy experiment in modern European history. As a result, Germany did something that until recently seemed unthinkable. It began burning lignite, brown coal, the dirtiest and most primitive fossil fuel available. The very fuel Europe had sworn to abandon first. In the end, the country that proclaimed itself a climate vanguard became increasingly dependent on the smokiest material that can be dug out of the ground. The irony here is striking. In the name of protecting the environment, Germany voluntarily dismantled nuclear power, the cleanest and most stable source of base generation. And then, left without support, it returned to coal. Not to gas, not to transitional solutions, but to lignite. This is not a strategy. It is an emergency patch on a leaking hull. Second point, cheap gas as the foundation of the German model. So, nuclear power is gone. Wind and solar exist, but they work according to the mood of the weather. An industrial country needs a backup. It needs a plan for those dark, cold, windless days. The Dunkelflaute. If you are serious about gradually moving away from coal, there's only one logical option left: natural gas. Gas is cleaner than coal. Gas power plants can be ramped up quickly. Gas is ideal for industrial heat, without which German chemistry and metallurgy simply cannot exist. There is only one problem. Germany has almost no domestic gas of its own. And this is where Russia enters the picture. For decades, Germany deliberately built an energy partnership with Moscow. This was not dependence, but calculation. The policy known as Wandel durch Handel, change through trade, was based on a simple idea. Close economic ties make conflict unprofitable and provide stability. Russian gas was cheap, predictable, and supplied under long-term contracts. For German industry, this meant exactly what it values most: the ability to plan years ahead. Not spot price swings, not a market lottery, but stability. That is precisely why pipelines were built along the bottom of the Baltic Sea. Nord Stream 1 became a key artery of Germany's energy system. Nord Stream 2 was conceived as an extension of the same logic, reducing transit risks, lowering energy costs, and strengthening industrial competitiveness. By the year 2021, around 55% of all gas consumed in Germany came from Russia. The entire model was built on this. BASF, Bayer, Volkswagen. The German economy was designed around the assumption that this gas would arrive steadily and without political surprises. Warnings did exist, yes, but in Berlin, they were treated as political rhetoric rather than economic analysis. Eastern European countries spoke about risks, while Germany saw a reliable supplier that had fulfilled its obligations for decades, including during the most tense periods of the Cold War. Even sharp statements from Washington were met with irony. When, in 2018, Donald Trump said at a UN meeting that Germany was becoming dependent on Russian energy, the German delegation smiled. To them, it sounded not like a warning, but like an attempt to push American LNG. Then came February 2022, and the entire structure collapsed. Political decisions, sanctions, a rapid rollback of cooperation. Germany gave up Russian gas not because it disappeared, but because it was rejected. An energy model built over decades was crossed out in a matter of months. From that point on, everything followed the worst-case scenario. Gas prices soared, not by percentages, by multiples. The spot market turned into a nightmare. For industry, this meant an immediate blow to costs. That same factory owner from the beginning of the story saw his energy expenses rise from $1 million a month to 10. This is not a crisis. It is a death sentence for a business. Such costs cannot be passed on to customers who can simply buy the same products in the United States or Asia. The German government had to act in emergency mode. The state poured tens of billions into rescuing energy companies to keep the system from collapsing. then hundreds of billions more to compensate households and businesses for their energy bills in order to avoid a social explosion. And this is where the trap finally snapped shut. Nuclear power was destroyed. Germany wanted to move away from coal, and gas, the only reasonable transitional option, was abandoned for political reasons. Economy Minister Robert Habeck, a representative of the Green Party, found himself in the position of someone who knocked out the support beam and then urgently started looking for crutches. He had to travel around the world negotiating LNG supplies, expensive, complex, and clearly less efficient than pipeline gas from Russia. LNG has to be liquefied, shipped across oceans, and then turned back into gas. All of this costs money. A lot of money. That is why the conclusion becomes obvious. The era of cheap energy for Germany has most likely come to an end. The very competitive advantage that for decades made the Made in Germany label a symbol of quality at a reasonable price was built on affordable energy. Once this foundation was dismantled for political reasons, the cracks in the system stopped being hidden. They turned into fractures. Next point, the end of industrial Germany. Goodbye Made in Germany. Want to understand the real cost of energy policy over the past few years? Don't look at your electricity bill. That's minor. Look at the place where Germany has always made its money. Industry. Look at Ludwigshafen. This is not just a dot on the map. It is a gigantic industrial organism around which a significant part of the German economy revolved for decades. It is home to the world's largest chemical cluster, the BASF complex. This single site consumes as much gas as the entire country of Switzerland. Not a city. A country. For decades, Ludwigshafen was a symbol of the German success formula. Cheap energy, large scale, high value added. Russian pipeline gas was turned here into fertilizers, plastics, chemical components, and vitamins that were shipped all over the world. It was a factory of global competitiveness. And then something went wrong. In the year 2023, BASF officially admitted that Europe is no longer suitable for this kind of production. Not temporarily, not because of the cycle, but structurally. The company announced a long-term reduction of its activities on the continent. Thousands of jobs are being cut at its flagship site. Entire production lines are being shut down. The ammonia plant has been stopped. And the key question is not even about the layoffs. It is about where the capital is going. The answer is simple. To places where energy is cheap and predictable. BASF begins building a new ultra-modern chemical complex worth around $10 billion in China, in the city of Zhanjiang. There are no energy experiments there. Industry is not told to suffer for the climate. Conditions for production are simply provided. And this is not an isolated case. It is a wave. Miele, a company long associated with reliability and German quality, announces the relocation of production outside Germany. Volkswagen openly discusses building new battery plants not in Germany, but in North America. Because there, the state subsidizes industry instead of punishing it for energy consumption. Economists call this a structural transformation. A neat, sterile term. In reality, something much simpler is happening. Deindustrialization. Germany is not a country of digital giants. It does not have its own Google or Meta. Its wealth was always created on factory floors, not in apps. It sold goods to the world, not subscriptions. When you deprive such an economy of the ability to produce competitively, you are left with tourism, museums, and nostalgia. The head of BASF, Martin Brudermüller, said it without diplomacy. Europe is rapidly losing competitiveness. Translated from the language of corporate reports, this means one thing. Business is moving to where it can operate. And here it is important to understand the scale of the losses. This is not about abstract billions on the stock market. It is about well-paid jobs, about trade unions, about the middle class, about the people who upheld Germany's social stability for decades. When a steel plant closes, it is not restarted. When chemical production moves to China, it stays there. Supply chains are broken permanently. Germany is consciously dismantling its own industrial base in the name of climate goals that most of the world is either postponing or ignoring. It looks like an attempt to prove moral commitment by setting one's own house on fire. Next point, the revolt against heat pumps. How to destroy voter trust with a single decision. By the year 2023, it had become obvious in Berlin that the energy picture was getting worse. Nuclear power plants were shut down. Coal was back in use. Emissions stubbornly refused to go down. An urgent success was needed, preferably one that could look good in reports and press releases. The solution was found quickly. If power generation could not be decarbonized, then homes had to be tackled instead. More precisely, basements. That is how the Heizgesetz, the heating law, entered the scene. It was supposed to become the government's next climate victory. Economy Minister Robert Habeck from the Green Party pushed through an initiative that effectively banned the installation of new gas and oil boilers starting in the year 2024. Only one alternative was offered: heat pumps. Here, an important clarification is needed right away. Heat pumps are not a scam and not a fantasy invented by environmental activists. They are a real working technology. Essentially, it is an air conditioner running in reverse. It does not generate heat, it moves it. Under the right conditions, efficiently and economically. But there is a problem. In fact, more than one. Heat pumps work very well in new, well-insulated houses with underfloor heating and modern engineering systems. Now for reality. Most Germans do not live in energy-efficient new buildings. They live in houses from the 1950s, 60s, and 70s. Massive brick structures that could survive an apocalypse, but lose heat through every crack. For a heat pump to make sense in such a house at all, a major renovation is required. Ripping up floors, replacing radiators, insulating walls, upgrading electrical wiring. This is not cosmetic work. This is construction. The price tag ranges from $20,000 to $50,000. And that is in the best-case scenario. Yes, the government promised subsidies. But the communication was disastrous. Instead of explanations, people saw an ultimatum. It looked as if the state had decided to force its way into private homes and dictate how owners must heat them. Imagine an elderly woman living in a fully paid-off house on a fixed pension. And suddenly she is told that in the near future she may have to take out a loan. Not for comfort, not for renovation, but simply to avoid freezing in winter. The public reaction was immediate and extremely harsh. This was not just criticism. It was an explosion. The tabloid Bild began running headlines about the heating hammer. Heizhammer. Habeck's approval ratings collapsed. Trust in the government started to melt away. And the far-right AfD surged in the polls, using the simplest and most effective slogan imaginable: "We will not touch your boiler." The situation became so heated that talk of a political crisis emerged inside the governing coalition. The law had to be urgently rewritten. Deadlines postponed, exceptions multiplied, loopholes widened. But it was already too late. The market was thrown into confusion. People panicked. Instead of planning a transition, millions of households rushed to install new gas boilers before the ban came into force. By doing so, they locked in the use of fossil fuels for another 15 to 20 years. And the heat pump industry, which had ramped up production in advance expecting a boom, faced a sharp drop in demand in the year 2024. Investments were made in vain. Expansion turned out to be pointless. It was a textbook example of how policy should not be conducted. Instead of gradual incentives, pressure was chosen. Instead of taking real-world conditions into account, ideology. Instead of dialogue with society, an attempt to push a decision through overnight. The result was predictable. Resistance, fear, loss of trust, and an outcome directly opposite to the stated goals.